Education Town Hall on Racial Justice and Equity. My name is Brenda Griffin. I am the president of the local chapter of the NAACP. Over the last 2 years, the NAACP has been working closely with the Santa Cruz County Office of Education to discuss the contributions, achievements, and needs of our Black students in our schools. We formed the African American Student Achievement Task Force. The goals of the task force are to build a sustainable model for change in our school system, to address the challenges presented by the data, to address the challenges shared by our students and families. And tonight's event is one of the products of this exciting partnership. I want to mention that if you need translation, there is a translation button at the bottom of your screen. And so our schedule, just want to go over the schedule. We've had a slight change in our schedule. Mr. Thurman's schedule changed at the last minute, and he will not be able to join us this evening. Our guest speaker will be Dr. Daniel Lee, Deputy Superintendent of Equity. Dr. Faris Sabbah, County Superintendent of Schools, will share some data. Our keynote speaker will be Dr. Pedro Noguera. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. Dean of the Rosario School of Education. You'll hear student voices. Enid Lee, a leader in anti-racist education. We'll talk about the role of community in the education of African American students. We'll go into breakout groups for 20 minutes, and then we'll return as a whole group. Right now, I would like to introduce our County Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Faris Sabbah. He has made equity a cornerstone of his work as our County Superintendent and is dedicated to designing schools that meet the diverse needs of our student community. He believes wholeheartedly that education is about serving the whole child, to disrupt inequitable practices and uplift student voices. Tonight, he will be sharing some data to help us develop a better understanding of the experiences of our students of African descent in Santa Cruz County. So we're glad that you are joining us tonight. Welcome, Ferris.
Thank you so much, Brenda. It's really a pleasure to be here with you tonight and to share this forum with you. And I've been inspired by your leadership as president in NAACP and in the work that we've been doing over the last few years. It's really such an exciting opportunity to be here together to talk about the amazing contributions of our students of African descent. And we have some amazing speakers that you're going to be hearing from. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. He is in a position to focus on equity at the California Department of Education. Dr. Lee his work is to bring cohesion to all of the California Department of Education's equity work, and he facilitates a newly created counseling coalition to help support the organizational development around building counseling, social emotional learning, and other whole child programs. This work is something that we have to be committed to at the local level, at the county level, at the district level, and of course, nationally. And it is an honor to have Dr. Lee to speak to us about some of the work that the California Department of Education is doing. Dr. Lee, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Saba. And I do want to, send my wishes out from the superintendent, Tony Thurman. It was an emergency that came up, so he was unavailable for that. So if he could be here, I know this is a passion of his. So I'm going to do my best to represent our superintendent and department and just share some few words. So first, I want to thank all the participants and everyone who's worked hard. I was watching everybody do the final checks to get this set up, and I enjoy seeing the energy and the effort that goes into programs like this for the community. And I want to welcome sort of all of our students and parents and caregivers and educators and community members to what I know will be a wonderful event. The beauty of working with the department, even when they ask you to step in, they give you some prepared words. So I know I only have a short time to talk to everyone, but I want to sort of craft these words sort of in my perspective, just to make it a little bit more personal and something more meaningful for me as well as the audience out there. I guess the points that the superintendent wanted to really talk about was really wrestle with the disparities that we face. And that's one of the reasons I'm appointed at the department, where, one of my focuses is really to think about how we're integrating equity in everything we do in the department, whether it's internally facing in terms of our internal work, and whether it's externally facing, how we're working with our stakeholders and communities. I think one of the things that we're seeing, and I think we've been watching this for the last few years in particular, is that most people are hard pressed to say that racism is not real. Most people are hard pressed to say that, it doesn't exist. It's just in your head. We're experiencing sort of experiences of racism in real ways. And everybody witnessed what happened on January the 6th, early this month. And that was really a testament to sort of the struggles we're having and the tension points we're having around dealing with differences. And also the belief that if you believe that privilege in this country is a property or a right, then what happens is that leads us to have sort of ideals and issues, particularly around sort of white resentment and anger around I'm losing something. But what we have to understand is that privilege, and when we think about white privilege in particular, is really about a process. It's how it infects us in a lot of different ways, good and bad. And one of the things that we see is that we have to address that head on. And we have to be conscious in terms of all of our actions and even platforms like this to really think about how do we create equity and justice for all. And one of the points that the superintendent wanted me to communicate tonight is that we understand how this plays out in our educational system. We understand that sometimes it's the haves and have-nots. Your education in this country can be based on what your parents can afford in terms of taxes and the communities they can get in. Then what that means is that you have some groups who have a better, playing field than others. And as we're talking about African-American youth, one of the things that we understand is if we're talking about the resources that are available to some of our African-Americans, even just students of color, we understand that it's lacking. And if we keep managing a system from a perspective that's broken, we're going to keep getting sort of faulty outcomes. And we know some of the statistics that Black youth are more likely to be suspended or expelled, that they are more likely to be referred to law enforcement, they're more likely to be referred for special education services. Those are hallmarks of a broken system. And what we need to talk about, particularly here, what we're doing at the department is how do we fix a broken system? How can we start thinking about a future where we know there's possibilities and where we know, I'm a parent of 2 Black children. And so I can say as a parent that it works. I'm an uncle of Black children. And one of the things I can say is we can be successful, and I think one of the things I want to encourage everybody that despite sort of the chaos that we're seeing, despite the hate and just the anger and the resentment that's going on, we still have the ability to overcome this, and we still have the ability to lead this process in terms of change. So one of the things that I want to address is how can we get through this racial divide? And that's where education comes in. I think we always have to remember the power of education. I have to say, I'm one generation from a welfare parent. So to go from one generation to a welfare, from being raised by a parent on welfare, it's a testament to education, and it's a testament to opportunities, and it's a testament to really challenge everybody out there that is possible. And I think one of the things that we want to talk about that as we're sort sort of figuring out ways to restore our democracy, as we're figuring out ways to restore our hope, and as we're figuring out ways to make sure we can institutionalize equity, diversity, and inclusion in everything we do, we have to remember that we have a place at the table. And that part of that place at the table is what is it, the successes that we can have? What are the triumphs that we can have, in terms of the things that we do? So at the department, one of the things that we want to really talk about is how we can become a more proactive and systematic in our way to deal with disproportionality, to deal with disparities. And we also understand that it's not just what we have to do with our stakeholders. It's initiatives that we have to take and do with ourselves. So, if people aren't aware, one of the projects that I'm leading is we're going to be completing an implicit bias training for every employee, and that's 2,300 of them that are connected to Department of Education. And that's a big lift, but we really understand that changing culture and having these expectations has to start from within. We can't keep having expectations around what everybody else is supposed to do until we're doing the work we're supposed to do. We're also having an emphasis on doing some equity grants where we can address in real time. One of the initiatives that the superintendent prides himself on is how to get resources at the local level in real time to create real change. So we had over 450 applications for our equity mini grants. We're going to be issuing out in the next few weeks over $200,000. So you see the need is even greater than the resources, but we're going to keep finding ways to invest in our local systems around how to create that opportunity for every student to be successful. Next, we have our Education in Hate initiatives. And I don't know if you've been following our webinar series. And the last one we did was on Islamophobia. I mean, we're really trying to make sure that we can get teachers and educators the resources they need to create real change in their classroom and really provide that resource statewide. We also are finalizing the ethnic studies model curriculum, and which is another real-time tool that can really talk about how to infuse diversity and inclusion and even themes of anti-racism into curriculums across the state. So look for that. We're sponsoring an equity summit for educators on January 29th. So if you're free, I believe we're starting it at around 2:30. And so we want you to join us if you're interested in doing this work, and look for the save the date because we're getting ready to send that out this week. And finally, we had some work done earlier last year where we did alternatives to school police and discipline. And that's another sort of opportunity that the superintendent really wants to lean in on around how can we get more resources to schools. So where we can look at sort of environments, particularly school environments, as restorative practices, as ways to engage family and students, to ask that question that we all should be asking: what's going on and what do you need? So we're hoping that that will be a resource. And, and as I close,
sorry, Dr. Lee, go ahead.
Sure. No, I was just going to close with just one final point, which is that, Dr. King said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. I believe the knowledge and support we give our students is that light. So I want to thank everybody for your time and attention, and have a good session.
Dr. Lee, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to work with our state superintendent who has made a commitment to equity, especially in a time of a pandemic, continuing this work. I think putting you in this position and to continue this important work on behalf of the students of our state has been inspiring. And so it's really a pleasure to get to meet you, and I look forward to working together on a lot of the initiatives you discussed. I'd like to switch gears at this point to talk a little bit about our data. And as I think about what the County Office of Education has been doing for the last few years, and our work with Brenda Griffin and the NAACP, school district leaders, our district superintendents, other leaders in our community, our youth, discussing the strengths and needs of our community as students of African descent in Santa Cruz County. And the first step was really to begin listening to our students and listening to them telling us about their experiences in our schools and in our community. And we also started gathering a lot of data, analyzing as much data as we could get our hands on. So tonight, we'd like to share a little bit, a small sampling of the data we've been looking at. And we know that quantitative data offers some insights about our students. We have 304 Black or African American students in our county, and about 1,500 students who identify as being of more than one race. And though the sample size of students who are African American here in Santa Cruz County is small, we cannot dismiss them with an asterisk like is done so much in so many websites that we find. The quantitative data that we'll be sharing is only one dimension of the complete picture of our students' experience. And I'll be using the term African American to refer to our students of African descent, as that's the most common term that we use in our educational data environment. As we take a look at how our student population here in Santa Cruz County, we find that 0.7%, less than 1% of our county is made up of students who identify as African American. And more students identify as being part of two or more races. And that represents 3.7% of the more than 40,000 students in Santa Cruz County. We feel that this more nuanced, more sophisticated definition the students are using for identity in a variety of different areas is represented by students identifying as being of two or more races in certain areas, a different, a more sophisticated identity when it comes to gender and sexual orientation. And all of this kind of these more complex identities make it more difficult for us as we're looking at our data, because our system is so antiquated that we only have these labels, the federal system, the state system for identifying our students. And so when we look at some of our data, how do our students compare? How do our students who are African American compare to in a variety of different measures? We could look at our graduation rates. Perhaps the most used measure of student success in our K-12 system. And when we look at how well our African-American students are doing, we see that our African-American students are actually graduating at higher levels than our other students, 93.5% of our students when looking at a 4-year window. And when you look at the peers, and you'll see that in all of this data, you'll see these multiple bar charts that really focus on these different groups of students that we're looking to look for kind of to be able to look at proportionality among our students. When we look at our students' suspensions, we see that students who have one or more suspension, we see that African-American students and Latinx students are suspended at higher rates than their peers. Our African-American students, 4.2% of them have at least one suspension on their record. When you compare that to their peers, you'll see that those numbers are higher. One of the areas that we look for to understand the students' experiences is using the California Healthy Kids Survey. And this is a survey that's given out every 2 years, and it's given out to students in grades 5, 7, 9, and 11. And students are able to take this survey anonymously, and they're able to answer a variety of different questions in a variety of different areas. And that, even though it's anonymous, students do identify the race that they identify with and other demographic information. There are hundreds of questions that students answer. So we've identified just a few to take a look at. And one of the questions that is important and correlated to student success is if students feel part of the school. And when we look at how African-American students, 37% said they agreed or strongly agreed with the statement, "I feel part of my school." And if you compare that to their peers, you could see that connection is that our students are feeling that they don't have that connection, that they do not feel as much part of their school as their peers do. Another question that is part of the California Healthy Kids Survey is if students feel safe. And when asked that question, about 57% of students said that they feel safe at school or agreed with the statement, which is lower than their peers as well. Another area, question that we look at is, and this goes back to the connection component, is if students feel that at school there is a teacher or another adult that cares about them. And we see that 62% of our African-American students agree with that statement, and that is very similar to other students. And that is another very important measure of success, that connection with adults, that connection with feeling a part of their school. As we as we continue looking at the data, COVID-19 has been such a traumatic, life-altering experience for our community. Our school community has suffered so much loss, and this pandemic has exacerbated the inequities that our African-American students face. And we know that we're going to be looking at the deep impacts of COVID-19 on our students for years to come. When we look at how students are doing in school, one of the measures we look at is their grades. And we find that our African-American students are getting D's and F's at a higher rate than their peers as well. They're at the similar level to the Latinx students, and at about almost 30% of students getting D's and F's at the end of the first semester of this school year. And as you can imagine, getting D's and F's, especially for students at the high school level, this could have a detrimental effect on students' ability to graduate and college opportunities. And it definitely is something that our schools, district superintendents, and our leaders are looking at how we can mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 and the experience the students are having right now. When we think about the kinds of broad strokes that I just shared with you, and these are just a sampling of some of the data points that we're looking at. They inspire us to continue our efforts to dismantle the legacies of white supremacy. They, in broad strokes, maybe give us more answers, more questions and answers, but they inspire us to make data and information more accessible to our community and to our leaders. We've been working hard at the County Office of Education to create more transparency for our community, to be able to allow people to interact with the data. We created a data portal. There's a link there. We can put it in the chat for you to be able to visit at some point to check out that data and see how you can interact with that data. We've also launched a repository of resources to help educators transform their teaching and learning practices. And you can find those resources at justice.santacruzcoe.org. There's clear evidence that there's an opportunity gap that exists for African-American students throughout this country, and it exists here locally. These challenges don't eclipse the profound impact our students of African descent have on our schools in a positive way. We have to be deliberate in our efforts to learn from, to celebrate, and to support our students. And their stories, our students' stories, have to be told, and they need to be heard. And they need to be part of the inspiration, the motivation for us to be able to transform our schools. I hope you'll continue to participate, and we'll be sharing a little bit about where we go from here as the night goes on. But I hope that this small piece of information, these small tidbits of data that we shared with you gave you a little bit more insight in some of the challenges that our students are facing and some of the successes that they're having in our schools. Thank you for allowing me to share that with you. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker. And this is somebody who really needs no introduction. Somebody asked me recently if I knew Dr. Nogueira, and I said, I don't know Dr. Nogueira, but I've cited him in my research when I did my dissertation. And he is somebody who I think every single person who was in my doctoral program cited him. He is somebody who has been so transformative and helped us better understand the needs of our students and the things that we can do to celebrate, to understand, to honor, and really embrace this equity work. Dr. Pedro Noguera is the Emery Stoops and Joyce King Stoops Dean of the Rossier School of Education and a distinguished professor of education at the University of Southern California. Prior to joining USC, Dr. Noguera served as a distinguished professor of education at the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA. And before joining the faculty at UCLA, he served as a tenured professor and holder of endowed chairs at NYU, Harvard, and the University of California, Berkeley. He's the author of 15 books. His most recent books are A Search for Common Ground, Conversations about the Toughest Questions in K-12 Education, and Rick Hess and City Schools and the American Dream, Still Pursuing the Dream. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pedro Noguera.
Thank you, Dr. Saba, and thank you all. It's great to be with you. So it's a real pleasure to be with all of you tonight and to address these important questions that you've taken on as a county. And so I want to start by just with some good news. And the good news is that we know how to support Black students. We know how to help them to be successful. It's not as hard as it may seem. And the proof is that there are many that are succeeding. I can name them. I was one of them. And you don't have to come from a family with lots of money. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in the housing projects. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. They sent all 6 of us to college. There are students like me in your schools now. That is high achieving Black students. I want to encourage you all to take time to talk to those students about their experiences, about where they're getting support in school and outside of school, because it is by learning about their experiences that we'll be able to learn how to support other students. I don't want to suggest that we are not at a moment of crisis, because we are in the country and in education. Even before the pandemic, we knew that these disparities that Superintendent described were deeply entrenched and pervasive throughout the country. The achievement gap, that is performance as measured by race and class, is consistent and persistent as a problem. We know that Black students in particular, as the data just showed, lag behind. But we also know that many students are bored and alienated in school. And that came out in the data too. How often do your children come home to you and say, wow, what a day. That was so excellent. I learned so much. I can't wait to go back for more. Well, that should happen sometimes, shouldn't it? Education, when done right, should make you want more education. And so we have to do a better job at learning from success. So the pandemic has disrupted a lot of things. My hope is that it's a chance to start differently. I want to read a quote from Hugh Vasquez with the National Equity Project. He says, since we know that disturbance is required for change, and there's no doubt that disturbance is happening as we speak, the question is, are we willing to use this opportunity to create the kind of educational system we want? We have learned that if we are going to change a system, we as individuals first have to see what the system is producing. Then we have to engage with others to design something different. And finally, we have to act. Our schools were designed to obtain the results they get now. If we want better results, we have to figure out where change is needed. So all of us by now know that the police murder of George Floyd had ripple effects across the country. And we know on top of that, he was not the only one. This is a national problem that's been around for a long time. And as encouraging as the movement for racial justice was, especially coming during the middle of the pandemic, what we just saw last week reminds us of the depth of the problem in this country. Racism is very much alive and well. And this problem is not going to go away even when Donald Trump leaves office. But we also know that racism takes many forms. And while I don't have time tonight to talk about all those forms, I do want to encourage you not to generalize about the problem. We have a problem in interpersonal racism. That is people who harbor bigotry and prejudice in their hearts. We have a problem of internalized racism. People who see themselves as inferior because they believe the lies that are perpetuated. We have a problem of ideological racism, what we now call white supremacy, that affects all of us. We have institutional racism, which shows up in our school. It shows up in the data. And then we have what we call structural racism, which is a product of our history and embedded in every facet of our society. Now, as I said, I don't have time to address each of these, but I would say that if once we understand the nature of the problem, and as I said already, the problem is rooted in our history, reinforced by our economy, reinforced by our schools, and even the environment, then we know what we're up against. And while changing that is not easy, you can't make any progress unless you acknowledge the nature of the problem you're trying to solve. So some of the issues we've known about for Black children, and we released a report last year on Black children in LA County, which showed Black children experience higher rates of homelessness, higher rates of foster care placement, more likely to have an incarcerated parent, more likely to suffer from asthma, more likely to have experienced trauma. What's important to note about this list is that many of these issues occur outside of school, not in school, which means that if we only focus on what's happening in school, we will miss the bigger point. We need to see the whole child, as we heard from the very beginning. The whole child means we need to understand how a child's social needs, emotional, psychological, material needs impact their academic needs. When we can see the whole child, then we can respond holistically to the needs of our children. And when we start to respond holistically, then we know the problem and the solution are within our reach. So in many ways, the most important thing to know is that what Black children need is what every child needs. Every child needs high expectations. They need to be challenged. They need to be encouraged. So when you see data where not that many Black students are saying that I have supportive relations with my teachers, or I only have one, that's a problem. Because high expectations are necessary to counter the stereotypes. What are the stereotypes in our society? Well, for many of our kids, they believe they have a better chance of making it as an athlete or as a rap star than they do as an engineer or a teacher or an artist or a writer. Those stereotypes are pervasive in our society. Our schools must cultivate kids to believe they can be anything. And that can't just be a mantra, that has to be reinforced by real opportunities. Our children need to have their identities affirmed, their history, their culture affirmed. Otherwise, internalized racism takes hold. And they don't believe they can. They don't believe they can because they haven't been exposed to the great scientists, writers, Black authors, judges, doctors that are part of our history, but often not part of history lessons. And when children have a sense of pride in who they are, and when their culture is affirmed, their identity is affirmed, they're more likely to embrace education and learning. When they have a strong sense of belonging to the school, because children are social. When they feel connected, not only to their teachers, but to their peers as well, it improves performance. We've known this for a long time. Our students who are in sports, in music, who write for the newspaper, who are on the debate team, do better than the kids who are not involved. Why? Because those relationships build a sense of belonging, but they also build discipline. They build character. They build resilience. And that's what our kids need. They need supportive relationships with their teachers and their peers, which is why programs like AVID are so important for cultivating a sense amongst kids that it's cool to be smart and that my friends are on a similar path. Read the story of the 3 doctors of Newark, 3 young Black men who, despite incredible odds, all became doctors because they supported each other on their journey. And our schools need strong partnerships with parents, between parents and teachers. Because the research is very clear. When there's reinforcement at home for learning, kids will do better in school. Those relationships must be rooted in trust and respect. So I want to ask you now, are you surprised by this list? Does this shock you? If you want sources on this, read a book called Young, Gifted, and Black by Teresa Perry and Asa Hilliard and Claude Steele. And they document schools around America where Black children are thriving. And what those schools have in common is these conditions. And so I want to encourage you to be like a fisherman or a fisherwoman. Talk to someone who's good at fishing. What do they tell you? You fish where the fish are. Right? Where you want to know where the Black students are thriving, go to the schools where you see Black students excelling. I was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, home to the University of Alabama a few years ago, visiting Bear Bryant High School. In a city that's integrated, this was a segregated school, all Black. And they asked me to talk about how to raise achievement there. And I could tell from talking to the teachers that they didn't believe anything I was saying. So I asked them, I said, how many of you have ever been to a school where Black students are excelling? They said, we've never seen a school like that. I said, well, if you've never seen it, you probably don't believe it exists, do you? They said, you're right. I said, well, I challenge you to come with me to Brooklyn, New York. And I took them to visit Medgar Evers High School. And they were blown away. They were blown away by the students and by what the students shared about their experiences in schools. These are schools where discipline is not used to punish, but to promote character, to promote connection, where parents are engaged so we address problems when they occur, where we get at the root of the problem rather than simply addressing the behavior. When we enact strategies like these, strategies like those used at King Drew Science Magnet, we asked the question when we were doing our research in LA County, we said, which high schools in LA are producing the greatest number of Black students who are admitted to the University of California? We identified 8 high schools. They were all integrated schools that had very few Black students. And then we found the school that sends the largest number of Black students to the University of California, which is King Drew, which is all Black and Latino. What's different about King Drew? King Drew has a partnership with a medical school. Their students have a rich and rigorous curriculum focused on science and math and the health professions. The students have internships. They have summer programs. They have mentorships. They have all the things you need to support Black student success. So again, my message is, don't pretend that this is harder than it is. We have enough examples out there to know that we can do this. I applaud the county for taking this issue on, because you could easily say, you know, we don't have that many Black students and we could not even have to think about this. They're just a small percentage of the population. So I give you a lot of credit for taking this issue on. So now take it on in a way that's going to lead to actual progress and not more reports or meetings that go nowhere. We can and must do a better job. Here's a simple thing you could do right now. Get the boys and girls reading. Reading on their own time. Get them off the devices. Stop the video games. Get books into their hands. My father, who did not have a high school education, told me, you get a free education with a library card. And he practiced it. And they would make us, on Saturdays, go to the public library. Unfortunately for me, when I showed up on a Saturday at the library, there was a librarian who asked me, what are you interested in? And introduced me to books. And I became an avid reader at 8. You know what happens when kids take control of their education? They become powerful. That's what we are about, is giving kids the power that comes with education, the power to control their lives. And so again, I want to applaud the county for taking on this work and encourage you to focus on the substance of the work. Yes, we have many obstacles, but we also have opportunities for using education to create a more just society and for creating and helping our young people to solve the problems of previous generations. We need these young people to step up, and they can with the right education. Thank you, Dr. Saba, and I will stick around for if there are questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nogueira. Thank you for your inspiring words and for continuing to call for us to take assertive, deliberate, thoughtful action, not just talk, and not to just think about how we're going to continue to support and participate in finding solutions for the historical challenges that we face. You're definitely somebody who is an inspiration for many of the people that are on. And I think one of the big draws for this event tonight has been everything that you've brought to educational reform and equity work. And so thank you so much for your words and for your call to action tonight. Now it's time for us to listen to the voices of our students. At first, we had hoped to get a panel of students, and we felt that the ability to be able to do that effectively on Zoom might have been a little bit challenging. And so we decided to instead of bringing the students and having an interactive forum, we tried to working with that, and we decided to put together a recorded session with a variety of different conversations that we had with students. And I'm going to ask Celeste Gutierrez, who is the person who worked with students. She is she is a coordinator of student leadership and engagement here at the County Office of Education, a new position to really participate in engaging with students and to give them more opportunities to be a part of action-oriented projects in schools and in the community. I'm going to ask Celeste to introduce the video that we're going to be sharing with you today.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. And thank you, Dr. Faris Sabbah, for having this town hall and for having student voice be at the center of our work. I'm grateful, appreciative, and honored to present our students, Quintin from Cypress High, Isis from Harbor High, Rory from Sequoia High, Rashonda from Santa Cruz High, and Carmen from Harbor High. Thank you all for being courageous, vulnerable, and your willingness to open up your hearts to all of us.
All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and begin the video.
Hi, my name is Quintin Barnes, and I'm a senior at Cypress Charter High School. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the president of the Cypress and Santa Cruz County Black Student Union.
I'm a sophomore at SoCal High School, and I identify as she, her.
My name is Roy. I go to Sequoia High School. Oh, I'm in 11th grade. Probably, I'd say Black.
Hi, my name is Reshonda. I used to attend Santa Cruz High School. I now attend Benedict College in South Carolina, and I'm a freshman. I identify as a Black biracial girl. I use she, her, they pronouns.
My name is Carmen. I am a senior at Harbor High School.
As the president of the BSU, I'm pretty comfortable talking about things like race. Conversations about the topic can be a bit awkward and a bit uncomfortable, but they do need to happen for our society to move towards a better future.
I've always been really comfortable talking about race, and my family and friends and I have always talked about race openly and honestly. So I feel I'm fortunate in that sense because I've always had a really safe environment where I could talk about race with my friends and family.
I don't know, I've just always been comfortable around it. Like when I was in Oregon, I was the only Black student in the class, and they would just, I don't know, they would just talk about the history, and the teacher would always ask me if I wanted to step out. I'd be like, for what? Like, I don't know, it just, I'm not sure. It just doesn't, I don't know.
I've become pretty comfortable talking about race, especially attending an HBCU. It's often the center of most of our conversations. And just like being anything other than white in America, I feel like you're always talking about race, and so I've had to become comfortable with it. And truly, like the new reality is like I'm so uncomfortable that I'm just like comfortable with talking about how I'm uncomfortable, you know, in many settings, whether that's academic or professional or personal.
I actually am very comfortable talking about my race, and sadly it has taken me a long time to feel this comfortable, but I think that it's attributed to just these social stigmas and these stereotypes about being a certain race and what those expectations are.
I need a group of people who can be honest with their views and who can communicate not well, but enough. They need to be unafraid to ask questions that might be tough to ask or awkward, and there needs to be clear rules about the discussion as well to make sure that no one feels uncomfortable or excluded, or that if we go to something into just socially unacceptable.
Who can contribute to the conversation openly and honestly and without judgment.
I feel like it's more open because there's more colored people, you know, so even like the Hispanics, they were still in slavery too and stuff. It wasn't just Black people, you know.
You need faculty who listen, faculty who are willing to give up their resources and allocate resources to students that need. We need platforms for that. A kind of good example is always a panel, but I don't really, at this point, I don't know why things are optional. Like, I think they should be mandatory, and I know that there might be, whether it's a form of respecting others, you know, religious, home, traditions, blah, blah. Conversation about race is mandatory. I don't know, like, the other kids in the school have to deal with it. It's a public school setting. I think that it should be a mandatory conversation. And
in 6th grade, I didn't realize that it was a form of racism at the time, but now looking back, I realized that they were probably microaggressions about my hair, and just people asking me like, oh, you should, or telling me you should straighten your hair, or your hair would look really good straight, or like, is your hair real, things like that. Or when I would get like a new hairstyle, like braids or something, just people being like, oh, like, is that real, is it fake, like, how long does it take, just things like that.
I was living in Greenfield and I was going to Cesar Chavez Elementary. So like 4th grade, and this kid, he just kept calling me the N-word for some reason.
Probably at Baby Elementary, which is a Santa Cruz City school, and I remember people used to just always ask me if I was adopted because I had a white mom, and my dad wasn't really around when I was in elementary school. So people always ask me that. You don't realize that you have to ask, like, having to ask myself as like a middle schooler, like, oh, like, does he, like, you know, you think someone's cute, but do they like Black girls? And another lady asked my mom, when did you get her? My mom's like, I had her, I gave birth to her on this date, like, I don't know. We were attending a BSU trip. A couple students were like, you know, we had rules about volume and whatever in the airport, and everybody turns and looks at me like, Reshonda? I'm like, so clearly y'all don't know me outside of a classroom setting, because, and it's just like the genuine, they didn't think I was capable of composing myself. And that goes to the wild, scandalous, angry Black woman card. That's like a constant narrative.
There's always going to be that fear of offending someone, or that worry that you won't say something right and you're going to get ostracized for it. And it goes beyond racial conversations, part of every conversation, but I especially feel it prevalent in conversations about race.
It does like make you angry at times. The fact that it's still going on like that just like builds up a whole bunch of anger. Been going on for what? Almost 200 years, 100 years, something like that? 4? Dang. A response, because if you do respond, it just makes it worse.
We tried to call people out, especially singing songs. It gets a little complicated because people think that they can because it's on the radio and it's blurred out, and they can say it because they've heard it on YouTube, but no. So that I'm just kind of shut that down. My interpersonally, you know, targeted with racial remarks, I never felt that I could go to faculty because, again, when I approached them about something else, they told me I was whining. So they probably thought I was attacking them, but it's the simple fact that they thought I was attacking them, but I was just handing them the hard facts of like their failures. I had plenty of intersectionality that they never listened to.
I was talking to my grandma about that when they were writing, like they were pepper spraying them. Like they're like using pepper spray, but when the Black people, when they were protesting, they were getting shot. and these dudes are using pepper spray on them. And they're going into a government building. Like, what? If that was black people, they would have called in the SWAT team. They would have called in so many people. And not even angry. I thought I'd be mad about it, but it's just like, it's nothing new, really. No, I wasn't surprised, no.
In our community, that they don't think that black women can be that educated, and that's at a school level, the high school level of this community. What do they think that's going to happen when they start working at corporate offices within the community? Our society, I think systemic racism is gigantic. Specifically the police force, they used to be runaway slave patrol. Like, I don't know, that alone should be enough evidence to dismantle that and believe in abolition.
Seems right. Why wouldn't you want equality?
Labor. Some reasons for racial, socioeconomic, and gender equality, aside, I just wanted to include those three, are because it creates a better society. Equality should be the goal.
Providing everyone with the right tools they need so that they can thrive and be successful no matter what their skin color or social background is. So making sure everyone has the tools that they need and has opportunities so that they can get where they need to go.
It's just a system that has failed us racially, and we can see that. Obviously, we've seen it socioeconomically with how many poor and houseless population we have in Santa Cruz, California, but if you look at race, capitalism is a direct factor in mass incarceration. It was a direct factor in Jim Crow. Fines constantly. It was a direct factor in, say, the cotton gin. Eli Whitney literally, he made so much money off capitalism exploiting, what? Non-free black Americans who were ripped away from their country for the sole purpose to figure out this little system that, everybody's getting a lot of money if you work for it, but you can't work for it. It's only the top 1% of people. That doesn't make sense. 99%, goes to a socioeconomic level, but truly translates and shows how much, even though we are a minority in this country, why we face the most poverty, the most sexual violence, why? That's directly due to capitalism. So that racial equity would mean socialistic change.
Like, the social aspect is just really different now, because obviously we're not at school, and like a big part of school is like being social and like seeing your friends.
Waking up and staring at my computer for a couple hours, not being able to go out. Like, who wants to sit in their room all day and look at a computer and like type all day when you could like go to school? I mean, you're sitting, but at least you'll get to like get up and go hang out with your friends. I've actually been doing a lot better that I am home, and like I have all the things I like to do around me, that once I get the work done, like I'm free to do it, But when you're in school, you got to stay there for a couple hours. And and you could do extra work. It's easier to do extra work on here, on the computers.
Since everything's online, it's really hard to sometimes things get confusing online, and sometimes even when you reach out to your teachers, they don't always get it, or they don't check their email, and a lot of times the internet will cut out, so it'll be hard to get a lesson, and it's hard to understand a lesson online because it cuts out, but it's not really your fault. Even if you understand the material, you won't be able to get the lesson because of the internet. So that's been really hard.
In order to have a progressive conversation about race in Santa Cruz, people need to be realistic. As a person of color, it is not my job to educate every uneducated person. It is not my job to have to address every situation that's racist and to address every microaggression that happens to me. I can tell you that from the last 18 years of doing that, it's exhausting, it's draining, and it's disappointing. Yes, there are amazing people of color in Santa Cruz who organize things like walkouts and conferences and speeches, but until people who are not people of color realize that, conversations need to be had. or until they get comfortable being uncomfortable, no progress in Santa Cruz will be made. I am not just talking about showing up. I'm talking about showing up, participating, instigating, associating, and listening. The moment you say, oh, well, I'm not racist, so I don't need to attend that. The moment you turn your TV on and say, oh, good for those protesters, and then turn it off and go back to what you're doing. The moment you say, oh, well, because I didn't mean it like that, or because that was not my intentions, it wasn't racist. That is the moment that progress in Santa Cruz and anywhere comes to a halt.
We are so grateful to our students for being willing to share their stories with us. We took about a lot of footage and tried to bring it down, and it really didn't do justice to the amazing, inspiring things that our students talked about. You know, working with these groups of these students is just something that I think many of us who are in education, this is what it's about. This is why we're in education. This is why we are committed to making improvements. And this is why right now, I think it's such a great reminder of how we need to focus on the needs of our African-American students, our Black students here in Santa Cruz County, regardless of how many students there are, whether it's 300 or 3,000, the importance, the challenges that they're facing are so real. And if there's ever a call to action that inspires me, and hopefully it inspires you, this is it. So thank you, Celeste. Thank you to our students for such a powerful message from our students, and Carmen's last call to us to tell us that to step up, to take responsibility for who we are and what we do, and to be a part of the solution, to work together, to come together. That's what this is all about. So thank you so much to our amazing students for sharing a small part of their story with us. I'd like to invite somebody who's going to be speaking to us right now, and somebody very special who's also part of the African American Student Achievement Task Force, and Enid Lee is somebody who has been at the forefront of the equity work here in Santa Cruz County. In the same way that Dr. Nogueira is kind of a star at the national level, Enid is somebody who is a star here for us in Santa Cruz County and has led so much work when it comes to anti-racist professional development. She's a leader, a coach, and a writer. She consults internationally all over the world on equitable education and particular emphasis on language, race, and culture and the roles in education. She consults in connection with the state of California, which began her consultation started 25 years ago. And over the last 2 decades, she served in a variety of roles as a researcher for the Center of Language Minority Education and Research at Cal State Long Beach, and a visiting scholar at the New Teacher Center in Santa Cruz, working as adjunct faculty at the Department of Educational Leadership. And she received an honorary doctorate of law from Queen's University in Canada. And so please join me in welcoming Enid Lee, Dr. Enid Lee.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sabbah. And I have 5 minutes. That's kind of making me smile, wondering what I can say in 5 minutes, but I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to go for it. I felt that the piece that I could contribute in this 5 minutes is related to the question of the role of community organizations in this work. We are partnering this work with the NAACP, that they brought this particular issue. And I just want to say there are a couple features to consider as we go into our groups, our work, our breakout rooms, to think about how we make change in our community. And I would like you to think of the community broadly. I would like you to think specifically of how the inclusion and the participation of African American community organizations at the local level, how that is essential to the system that we are trying to create, so that the African American students who we have heard, who we have not heard, can demonstrate their brilliance and their creativity. And as I said, 5 minutes, you've got to talk quickly. There are 3 things I want to say about the community piece. The efforts to address the learning about for African American students has gone on in this community a long time. And I want to just mention a few organizations from whom we can learn and be inspired. And I go back to the Second Saturday School, which it was in the early 90s here. Whenever I come to a town, I ask who is doing what in the Black community, so I can know where I join in. And so I'm thinking about what I've learned, the role of the Second Saturday School, which had teachers, university people from the Black community who prepared and presented and worked with students from as young as 3 to middle school students from an Afrocentric perspective, math, science, and the arts. And then connected to that is the Second Saturday Education and Culture Network that has continued that work and expanded it to help students develop skills. The PAS, Parents of African American Students, still thriving at Santa Cruz High. And just a more recent group, the Santa Cruz County Black Coalition for Racial Justice and Equity, one of the founding members being Brenda Griffin, president of the NAACP and the Santa Cruz County. I mention those to say that those experiences are a demonstration of what community can do to ensure that the system serves. There's learning in those communities, there's inspiration in those communities, and there's historical recognition of what has gone on. One of the things that Dr. Nogueira mentioned was the importance of African American students knowing their history. And history doesn't have to be very far away. History can be immediate and local, and said, there are people in our community who have always come forward to support our work, and the variety is major. And I'm going to just mention one other person. And I wanted to mention the work of London Nelson. Some of us know him as Louder Nelson, but the actual name is London Nelson. And I'm talking about an enslaved African who arrived in this Santa Cruz County, and having gained his freedom, and I'm talking about 1842. I mean, I only have 5 minutes, but I'm not going to do 200 years of history, but I want to go back that far to make the point that under those difficult and challenging circumstances, when London Nelson died, he, in his oral will, gave his estate to the Santa Cruz City School District for the use and benefit of said school district forever, for the purpose of promoting the interest of education. And that donation was led to the first permanent school house in Santa Cruz. He died in 1860. I'm bringing that up to say that the work we are doing tonight isn't new. It has a long historical record. It needs to be recognized, drawn upon, and expanded. And students need to know about it. So as we talk about community, I talk about those who are living and those who are dead. And I wonder what it took for Loudon Nelson to have thought of that. And we also noticed that when people from our community give to help our own student, it helps everyone, because that school wasn't just for African American students. And I want to say, as I move forward, that that history is important because the students talk about needing a sense of belonging, both of schools and of community. And they are amazing people with whom they can connect if we consciously include those communities, and if those communities insist on participating fully into what is happening here. I spoke with the organizer of the countywide Black Student Union, Danae Wilder Gabriel, and he said the theme that comes up often is belonging. How do we belong and where do we belong? And that diverse component tells us there's a lot to belong to as African-American students. So those young people who are talking about the experiences, they need to have exposure to and knowledge about the range of abilities that are in this community that can inspire them and that can help them challenge stereotypes of who it is to be Black. Finally, the guiding principles for me are these. The gaps we talk about are not in the children. The gaps are in the system. And so when we go to talk about making changes, let's look at that system. And the diverse nature of the Black community need not be seen as confusion. It can be seen as richness. Because it's diverse, there's a place for everyone to connect and belong. And in doing work around justice, there are a few things that guide me. And one of them comes from a group of students at Santa Cruz High, where I worked with their teacher in a professional development session. And this is what the students came up with about how history is made. They said, we ask ourselves, who has done this work before us? Who else is doing it now? What piece is left for me to do? And how can I do it in a way that uplifts myself, my community, and the world? So as we go into our communities, our networks, to talk about changing the community, I'd like you to take those words with you, because I think that they are very relevant in terms of community and its strength. Thank you very much for the 5 minutes. I think I went over a bit, but they have allowed me. Thank you very much. Okay.
Enid, thank you so much for your powerful, powerful words. The gaps are in the system, not in the children. Thank you for that. We need to give you a hell of a lot more time than 5 minutes. I don't know what we were thinking about that, Enid.
Next time.
Next time, absolutely. Thank you for your work, your leadership on our task force. Thank you for helping us to put this event together. Thank you for all that you do on behalf of our students in our community. A lifetime of dedication to this equity work. You're going to be going into a breakout group. The groups will be facilitated. We're going to have the ability, you will have the ability to use your microphone and camera in just a moment. Wonderful. Thank you so much for participating in our breakout session. And we just have a couple of minutes just to say thank you for being a part of this. I would like to share with you that we are planning on continuing. We're going to be doing quarterly sessions. And if I were to look at the June board that you were working on, we definitely need more time with Enid Lee, that's for sure. But we're going to be doing quarterly equity events similar to this one with special speakers. We're going to have lots of expanded opportunities to connect with each other, to learn and grow together. And I want to thank all our speakers, our wonderful facilitators, the African American Student Achievement Task Force. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And our equity team who helped facilitate and organize this event tonight. We're doing a lot of things that we are very proud of at the County Office of Education, and we're so proud that you join us tonight and are helping us with this work, because it is only together that we're going to be able to make the changes that we need to make for our community. In the chat there is a link to our survey. If you wouldn't mind clicking on that and helping give us feedback for our next session, which will be in a couple of months. And we're going to have, if you have ideas about speakers that you want us to invite, or anything else that any recommendations you have, we want to grow from this, and we want to continue to create these opportunities for you. Thank you for being a part of our community. Thank you for being a part of this equity work and our equity journey. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much for your time tonight.